I love having people on our show that come from all over the world. Certainly one of our guests today who returns for her second go around with us is on the all accent team. If I recall, you're from Nebraska? Is that?
Yeah, somewhere like.
Yeah, Nebraska. No. Natalie, welcome back.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
So we had you on just over a year ago. I believe it was January of 25 for episode number 99. We're up to approaching 160, I believe. In the world of AI, which is your world, and why we had you on the first time to talk about it, just in that 13 months since we last spoke, so much has happened. Actually, so much has happened since we booked this recording.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you give us a quick overview of what you think the state of things are since we last talked? Because we had such a good chat last time.
I know. I mean, I'm gonna sort of just try and define my lane, I guess, because there's a lot going on when it comes to AI. And what I'm continue a nice constant and through line through all my work really is I continue to focus on the relationship between human beings and AI on a daily basis in their work in ways that enable humans to hold on to their agency, right? To hold on to having direction, control, freedom in their lives, and how people can collaborate with AI to increase that agency rather than give it away. So I'd say that's a constant through line. And I am particularly excited at the moment about really kind of researching and digging into this space even further as I and you and all of us experience the advances in the capabilities themselves. And as that line of what AI can do for us keeps moving, it can do more and more and more. What should we let it do? And what does that leave for us to do? And what do we need to be very conscious of claiming and holding on to in order for this relationship to work?
I mean, isn't that the conversation that many are having? Because on one hand, everybody thinks that they're getting replaced by AI. But then I think when we speak with you and, when Punch and I talk about this, we're talking about, hey, how does AI serve us and help us and help us think better and help us orient to reality better?
Well, first of all, I think the fact that we can offload a lot of really tedious tasks to AI is liberating, right? So something that I've been playing around with a lot recently is Claude Cowork. And the fact that I can allow an AI agent to take control of my machine and do the tedious tasks of, let's say, API integrations or like connecting, zaps from this to that and everything to like help me in the back end of my distribution of my content. The fact that I don't need to do that myself and spend my day doing that and feeling really frustrated about it is incredible. That's incredibly emancipating. So I'm all in favor of that. Of course, there's the trust questions and like, should you trust that agent to do these things for you and whatever? But like, as long as that's taken care of, and actually interesting, I think it's really interesting as well, sort of a tangent, maybe we'll get to this after, building trust. Like I think Anthropic's done an incredible job of branding and coming out as like, we're the trustworthy platform. Like I don't think twice about using Claude Cowork, even if technically maybe I should question trusting Claude Cowork to take over my machine. I'm just like, yes, permissions, yes, because I trust the brand. The brand has done a really good job, in my opinion, recently of building that trust with consumers to enable us to feel comfortable about actually outsourcing such things like use of your computer to an AI. But I would not trust and necessarily entrust another AI incumbent to do that. So I think it's really smart. Like we need to be able to trust in order to do it. Everyone's got there are thresholds of trust, and it might be that we trust some more than others. So I think part of the battle now amongst the AI models actually comes down to how much trust they can generate. And I find that really fascinating.
I struggle with giving Claude access to files. Before I do that, I'll back it up. I will test it out. I will do those things. Having seen a lot of data breaches and a lot of issues over the last several years, our likely chance that our phone's already hacked, somebody has access, apps have, Siri can listen to this, things can do that. There are unintended consequences of doing this. So I'm hesitant to do it just based on my orientation with the threats that have been around me for my lifetime. Right. It doesn't mean I won't do it. And then something else popped up in the last 48 hours. There's a heat map that came up, and I'm going to share it with you and our audience at the moment. I don't know if you've seen this, and Moose saw it, but I can't remember who wrote this or who created this. And I know it was taken down. This is on the Wayback Machine right now, but it's given a heat map of where likely jobs are going to be and not be in the future, right? Have you seen this, Natalie?
No, I haven't.
All right. So
I can't think of his name. I have it here. I'll pull it up.
yeah, it was somebody who was working with Elon. Somebody worked with I can't remember which company. I don't want to get this wrong, but it's just a nice heat map that pulls from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and looks at what jobs are likely to go away. So if you're in the green, if you're a cook, if you're a hard hand laborer, physical jobs, you're pretty safe. If you're in the legal field, if you have the computer in front of you at work, or if you're working remotely, kind of like what we're doing, you're you're a target, right? AI might be taking over things from you, and it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just how things are evolving. It's an interesting heat map that came up, and they took it down within 24 hours of them putting it up. I mean, do you have the name on that?
I'm looking for it right now.
Okay.
I couldn't pronounce the guy's name, but he was not OpenAI CEO.
Have come from OpenAI.
No, it wasn't OpenAI. It was anyway, I'll send it
Put it
to
in
you,
the
Natalie.
notes.
Yeah, I'll find it while we're chatting here.
Yeah, that's cool.
There's an article recently in Forbes, the one I sent you, Punch, that someone was writing about how lawyers thought they were safe, and all of a sudden Claude is making them realize that no, we're not. we've got some challenges that we're not thinking about.
But the acceleration of AI is useful. And in our house this morning, my wife and I, she works with a data company, and we talked about what our game plan is. Once our jobs are not eliminated, but when we have to really compete for them. I think we're lucky. We have interesting thesis. We have interesting content, access, things like that. I think we're safe. But for those that were coming from the consulting world, the agile world, where software developers are being reduced dramatically, we've heard from product owners that you can sit down with your customer now and you can vibe code things into things, right? That vibe coding thing that's happening. So the world's changing, in my opinion, faster than I thought. And what we know from being on or having different guests on the podcast, it's about to get crazier. Natalie, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think things are getting pretty crazy and getting crazier. And I think that there's a couple of different ways of looking at this. I think when you look at it, like from taking a big step back and kind of like holistically, it actually feels pretty frightening, I think, in some ways. And then when you look at it, and this is my own experience, right? It's like, it's hard not to worry when you look at it from kind of a global perspective and kind of theorize about it. I do feel that the optimism can come about when you're actually working with AI yourself and unlocking the benefits to you. And I think that when you see piece by piece how benefits can be unlocked to you on a personal basis, you can start to imagine what the path to that future might look like for you and to what extent you need to learn to work with the tools as they're emerging and as their capabilities are increasing in order to be able to even know and be inside the game, to know how to navigate working with AI in a way that actually does offer fresh opportunities. I think that the job landscape is going to look extremely different. And I think there is evidence of pain already. I think that there is going to be a lot of pain. I also think that there is going to be a lot of opportunity, but to be able to seize that opportunity, you really need to be in it, and you need to be working with the tools in real time and trying to be aware of what you're bringing to the table. Like, the tools are doing their piece. So what are you bringing now that you've unlocked all this time? Because I don't need to spend all day, on my zaps. I'm like, okay, so what am I going to do? There's a certain comfort to just like the mechanics of work. And I think a lot of white collar jobs are actually about the mechanics of work. And that actually exposes a fault line or an uncomfortable truth with maybe how corporate life or corporate structures have evolved.
I feel like it started with, do you think like it started with COVID? Because I remember when COVID happened and I was working in asset management, it really, like when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming with a suit on and who's naked. Was sort of, AI has amplified this, but COVID, I think, showed a lot of the redundant jobs that don't need to exist anymore. I also think that blockchain did too. Like blockchain, not Bitcoin, but like blockchain as a trust system showed a lot of things in asset management and processing and others, that there were these massive legacy apparatus that could just go away. Then COVID, now AI, it's showing more and more and more. You're familiar with our Substack as we are with yours. I mean, I've not paid thousands for a graphic artist. Why would I do that? I can just go on OpenAI or Chat or Grok or Gemini. And I can make my own pictures the way I want them, and it could be done in like a minute or two. Why would I pay thousands for a graphic artist? That kind of thing. I mean, but you're seeing more and more of that. And
Say that maybe your business couldn't have emerged in the way that it has without the advancement of these tools that are available to you, right? And so that's an example of what is new that wasn't necessarily possible before with like a 2-person unit, or, maybe there's more other people in the background or people that like chime in, or, you bring in as needed, but a lot more can be possible with very fewer people. And that's not always a bad thing,
yeah.
So I think there is going to be a lot of discomfort, a lot of pain because of the way things have become, or the way that, company structures and stuff like exist today. But I also think that there are new ideas that will come to light, and just a lot of innovation that we can't even anticipate yet as a result.
Growing up in Pittsburgh, at one point there were thousands and thousands of steelworkers, right? And then all of a sudden there weren't, for various reasons with, labor costs and that sort of thing. But at one point still, Pittsburgh is still to this day producing a ton of steel with less than 0.5% of what I mean, that's just my number, but like less than 0.5% or 1% of what they had as a labor force, because of the innovations and the things like continuous casting or whatever in robotics that eliminated jobs anyways. I feel like what we're seeing with AI is not new. And that's something that we bump into quite a bit with some of our collaborators. They say, yes, the medium is the message, as Marshall McLuhan said. However, AI is different. And I think that McLuhan would say that, no, it's not different. It's like any other technology that humanity has had to adjust to, because it's having a direct effect on our human capacity.
Yeah,
What do
I
you
agree.
think? Yeah.
Well,
I think that as far as our human capacity is,
Our capabilities, or like to think that these
I
things
would say
don't
that
affect us.
I would say that basically our human capacity is being challenged right now, right? So it's like, I think we've got quite comfortable going through the motions of life and work, and maybe not having to think too hard or be on our toes too much. And there's just been a lot of kind of like, expectation about the comfort that a job will maybe provide for you without necessarily needing to exercise push yourself as a human being. And when I say push yourself as a human being, it's kind of like, being kind of more entrepreneurial minded, like feel the stakes, and try to be creative, and like need to be creative and think about, well, what is it that's needed? What should I do? What does this new situation present? What does it present? If AI can do my job, or a lot of my job, what should I be focused on? Like, how can I create value when the tools can handle so much of it? And for me, I really feel like our role as human beings is to create meaning, is to ask these questions and to figure out in our own world. So in my world, it's, focusing on this line of AI human collaboration, and kind of, the discomfort of that, and trying to figure out ways that we can collaborate in healthy ways with AI that constantly put our humanity in question. Like, what is it to be human, right? So like the post that I just published is around judgment, and why judgment should remain, broadly speaking, as a role that, the domain of humans, while execution belongs to the machine. But the post is actually about the fact that that line is constantly moving, because clearly AI can judge, and clearly we want it to handle a lot of judgment for us, because it's exhausting making the same judgment calls over and over again, and having to address, potentially hundreds or thousands of similar requests. Like, we want it to do that. We also want it to handle tedious work, make judgments on tedious work for us. But increasingly, as AI becomes more and more capable, its ability to actually judge for you in the way that you would judge yourself increases. And again, that's a good thing if you intentionally want the AI to do that for you. And you want it to do that for you because it makes it a more effective collaborator that understands you better. Yet there is a distinction between judgment kind of in the abstract, right? So just to be able to like reason through a problem and make a decision based on that reasoning, versus the type of judgment that human beings are capable of, which is founded on understanding and meaning. Like, what are the implications of this decision, right? So taking it all in. that is something that is distinctly human, as embodied creatures that have grown up and participate in the world. So that is the preserve of humans, is basically any type of judgment that requires context, meaning, understanding, which is contingent on the stakes as well. Do the implications of your judgment actually affect you or other people? Like, you can't rely on a machine that does not feel and experience those stakes to do that for you. There's a really interesting anthropic study that goes into this, and basically, because making difficult decisions, even though humans are really good at it, and we have instincts, we have something that the cognitive scientist John Vervaeke calls relevance realization. Like, we have this ability to zero in and just know the answer or know what's good and that kind of thing. But it's also uncomfortable making decisions, by just trusting your instincts. And this study actually shows, this anthropic study shows what happens when human beings outsource decision making to an AI, when clearly it's something that the human beings should have decided for themselves. They can't help but do what the AI tells them because it gives them this illusion of certainty. They go out and do it in the world and execute on these real world relationships, and then the result is regrettable. They express regret, right? So it's just proof that you can't outsource that kind of decision making to the machine, as tempting as it is.
You say meaning can't be encoded.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I believe. I believe meaning cannot be encoded. Judgment, which has a pattern to it and is routine, judgment that you can teach can be taught to the machine. But when it comes down to really understanding and operating making decisions based on what it will mean, what the implications are, a machine just can't do that. That is for you, especially as long as the impact of the decision falls on you and other people, right? So there's something about the stakes as well. And that's why
Plays the piece though. Like, who are you really writing this to? When you wrote this, who are you really trying to connect with in this
I
respect
think
of this piece?
it's people. Well, first of all, I write it partly for myself to make sense of things for myself, and then others who are trying to make sense of how to collaborate with AI. So these are people who are not, there's obviously a camp of people who just pro AI as fast as possible, let's reach a singularity as quickly as possible, and all that kind of stuff. All right, so it's not for them because they're just not interested in that.
Did you see Agents of Chaos? Have you seen that paper? Ponch and I are
No,
talking about that.
yes, I actually have seen that. Yes,
It's
yes.
basically, as I read it, it basically is all these people had outsourced all of their decision making, including their orientation. So they were trying to encode meaning. They had given up on what they're supposed to be doing. When we talk about, they'd given up on the world of reorientation and outsourced the entire thing. But I think ultimately that got them misoriented in the wrong direction. And when they had given everything over to AI, everything just falls apart, which is,
Moose, I want to add
expected.
to this. I got to step out here in a second. But one thing that we're noticing on the podcast, and we're reaching out to guests and actually bringing them on the show, is we look at how well people write, the topics they're writing about, and clearly we want those folks on the show. What we're finding and discovering is a lot of times they don't know what they wrote because AI wrote it for them, right? We've had guests on the show that we're asking them about something they wrote in the last 24 hours and they can't remember it. They're like, what are you talking about? And what we're finding is, I'll call them an AI parrot, right? They're just parroting what their AI says, projecting it out there as content. But when you put them in a room like this and you have a conversation, they have no idea what they're talking about. They're useless. And I think that's going to happen more at scale. It's just something that we're noticing.
It's
that's
becoming
a
more and more
really
visible.
interesting insight that happens with your own guests, who are people that presumably have a strong point of view and all of that. And I think that also has strong implications for where other humans get their meaning, right? So you're going to trust writing less, or you'll have a knack for seeing writing that was written by a human for humans. I've actually written about this before, specifically that distance that we feel. And there's studies from MIT and stuff that show when you let an AI write for you or write the first draft, if you weren't involved in at least at the very beginning, you have no connection to that work. And then I guess the question is, well, what was that piece of writing for, right? If it was just content marketing and it's riffing off a central idea, which is maybe true and meaningful, and it's just riffing, it's okay, so why not let AI do that? It's different iterations of the same. You opened it, you read it, maybe you didn't read the previous post because you missed it or whatever, all the sort of the rules of opportunities to see and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I strive to write in a way, even though I do use AI very much so. I strive to make sure, well, like I want it to connect with others and I want there to be a truth to it. So that's my medium. But it's interesting because live video, it's quite difficult to, you know, own an idea if you don't actually have it embedded in your system, right?
Yeah.
In a video conversation, like it's easier to call people out, I guess, or being in a live environment. That's why live events are, so important.
Well, we're
For
dancing around McLuhan because, he always thought that content was less important than the medium. The actual technology and the environment was more
Mhm.
was more important. And I kind of tie in too. I feel like AI outputs aren't necessarily bad, assuming that the thesis was good, right? Assuming that the thesis was coherent, assuming that, you could sit there and brain dump and on things that you know about and with your own unique thesis. And if the output reflects that, you'd have to know that because you'd have to have the command of the information, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the outputs were bad.
Yeah, I mean, if the thesis is grounded and means something and adds something and makes people feel something and it helps them to act in ways that they find valuable and therefore it keeps them coming back to the thesis,
Hmm.
and in whatever form, maybe you're doing them a service by articulating that thesis in more ways. They want more of that content, right? They want more ways to look at it. They want other ways that it can be said. They want it in different media. Like that's a good use of AI, I guess. But, like it depends on the strength of that original thesis.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really what it always boils down to anymore.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, like you could take a franchise, like a book, Harry Potter, right? That turned into a film. It turned into like all kinds of different things. I mean, that's because the central story is so powerful. Someone didn't hand make they did probably every aspect of that film. But, you can have all of these different iterations of things once you have that incredibly powerful story or thesis. And if it resonates, it resonates. And if people want more of it in different formats,
Yeah, I mean, you wrote in March about like dividing the labors. You were saying about offloading tedious tasks. And, these are things that Buckminster Fuller and Isaac Asimov, they predicted this with the automation of education, and they predicted this would happen. And that would be a benefit to humans in their thinking and their learning, that you would offload having to get in the car, drive to the library and go through the card catalog and all this stuff. Not that that didn't have merit in the old times when that was the prime technology at one point, but now you're able to offload that stuff and focus on what it is that you're actually learning. And you mentioned, like Claude being a thought partner. I mean, I think that's a pretty valid use of AI.
feels like it. Yeah. I don't have to bother there are certain humans whose value I definitely would want on
Hmm.
tap. But in the absence of that, Claude can do a decent job. It doesn't take the place of a human reviewer,
Mm.
ultimately, I don't think. So, but it depends on the stakes of
I
what
mean, I
it
would
is.
love to have a conversation with McLuhan, but I can't. But I can Socratically ask Claude questions about stuff that I've read about McLuhan's to, I think, learn it better. Like learn it with more effectiveness, actually, than, it's not that I still don't read books and take notes, because we still do that, and we still go through transcripts. And I just got back from a trip and about to go on another one, and I still take books with me.
Yeah.
But that, even though I understand it, there you go. Even though I understand it's artificial intelligence, there is something to be said about having to have a dialogue with it
Yeah.
as if they
Especially
were.
something as dense and obscure as McLuhan. It's actually
Yeah.
fantastic. But that's a great example of a thesis, a body of work that exists that can like live on further, like
Here,
Mm.
more
here's
and like
something
reach a
that
wider
here's
audience.
something that I'm noticing as I interact with Claude, and that is, and I'm seeing a lot of posts on this too, and a lot of threads on it. And that is, the way you interact with it is very similar to the way you would interact with a teammate.
Mhm.
The way you ask questions, the way you would use different type of acronyms to, a situation of background and a recommendation, that type of thing. What that means to me is that human agent teaming that is emerging is no different than what we understand from team science. And so we can start with that team science as a basis to help people understand this is how you work together as a team. And by the way, more than likely, this is how you're going to interact with an agent, not just a tool, but something down the road that might have some sentience, and who knows, might be conscious in the future. But this is how it works. So it's very valuable for me to see that the tools and techniques, the methods we've been teaching for the last 13, 14 years and teaming are more important today than they ever been. And I don't know if you're seeing that too, Moose and Natalie.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that's what, again, going back and reading like Asimov and all those things, I mean, robots were supposed to be our partners. Like those are supposed to be, like any technology is supposed to be a partnership that we can, as McLuhan said, that organically becomes an extension of myself. You know, I'm a Marine. A rifle is organic. A Marine animates a rifle. That rifle is an extension of me, of what, so it doesn't replace me. It enhances me, right? I mean, don't you think too, with John Boyd, with people, ideas, things, all in that order, things are, so as long as they're augmenting human faculties and human learning and advancing us as humans, that there's nothing wrong with that. He wasn't a Luddite.
Yeah. Well, sort of going, while we're on the historical references,
Yeah.
Karl Marx worried that with industrialization, that basically the worker would be more and more distant from the product, right? Like what they were actually creating at the end of the day, right? At the end of the assembly line, like they have their task, and the more industrialization there is, the more disconnected that you are. And that you could end up being an appendage to the machine, which is really, and those were his words, it's just really interesting language, which I feel is so...
Expand on that. I'm an economist, so I get it, but expand it, put that in terms of our audience.
Basically, being an appendage to the machine. So let's say, line factory, I don't know, manufacturing a car, and I'm like really not a specialist in this area, so forgive me, but like, your responsibility is, I don't know, like the rear view mirror, right? And that's all you do. And you're doing the rear view mirror like every single time. But what you're building, or a cog in a wheel, maybe is like more appropriate. But the point is, you aren't connected to the vehicle, the fleet of vehicles that are actually being produced and that you're contributing to, because you're just focused on this one tiny little thing. So you're an appendage to the machine, as in like you're just like a little add-on to this thing that is being built. You are not central in any way to what is being produced. And I think that's really relevant now, because I think that is exactly the risk with humans and AI, is we can become an appendage to the machine in a lot of different ways. Like one way is that we're just training data that feeds the machine.
Like training our replacements?
Right. Or just like our knowledge. We're like, we're educating the machine on all...
Or we're future batteries.
Knowledge.
Yeah. We're an energy source for...
Maybe I need to finally publish it. I've edited it so many times, and it's been out there for about a year. I just haven't published it yet. But I believe that's what content creators are doing on OnlyFans and whatever. They're training their replacements, because at some point the human angle there for the people that are consuming that is good. That's irrelevant to them at some point. If a machine can do exactly the same thing, always show up on time, but that kind of a thing, I think that's an interesting. I mean, again, that's one example, but I think that's an example of someone who's, as Ponch was saying, you're basically training. The consumers are training it one way for what it is that they want to consume. And then the content creators are training it another way, and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and what hits. I believe, actually, Natalie, it was at we want to talk about artists in the machine at some point, but when I went to that last year in Brooklyn, you had Hazard Lee talking about the F-35, and he was saying that the F-35, that the prime mission of that is to collect data from pilots.
Right.
It's training itself constantly on the pilots that are landing on carriers or taking off this way or doing these maneuvers and all that. And the whole entire time is it's augmenting its own knowledge and understanding of things based off the telemetry of the pilot. At some point, the way he was describing it, or the way I took it, was like, well, the pilots are training their replacements. And those things exist now.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a little bit like what I was just saying before. Like I have a Claude skill that I'm training on my judgment. Right? I'm actively training it on my judgment. I want it to know how I think better, because that will just make me more productive if I don't have to keep correcting it every time. Right? And so I'm kind of creating a digital twin of to the extent that I can, of like how I think. And Hazard Lee is creating a digital twin of how he operates, right? His skills in the cockpit. And I guess it comes down to the intent, right? Do you intend to be an appendage to the machine, or do you intend to offload work to the machine so that you can focus on the faculties that are distinctly human that the machine probably can't do.
Mm.
And you can sharpen how, like the distinctly human aspects of flying a fighter jet or thinking and writing and creating meaning.
Here's a thought, Moose. John Boyd's aerial attack study is no different than what we're talking about right now, what Hazard Lee's talking about, right? So John Boyd was able to break down through cognitive task analysis, which is hard for experts to do, is break that down and provide not a step-by-step approach, but this is how things work, right? So he did that in the 50s before he wanted to understand the nature of creativity. That's paralleling what's happening today, right? If the F-35 is collecting information from how people fly, how pilots fly, it's doing what John Boyd did back then. It's understanding that, how do the experts do this? And again, going back to Gary Klein's work, where he says it's hard to break down expert work because experts don't know how to describe what they're doing to others. That's what Claude is doing, right?
And that is what Hazard Lee's doing, because I think he led the training program for all new fighter pilots.
Mm.
And so, one use of this model that is being created, this digital twin of how he flies the plane, is to be able to simulate that for others.
Hmm.
So it's a way to teach. And again, it's kind of like, where is the emphasis? The emphasis here is on training humans to be as good as they possibly can be, right? By training the machines in a way that enables that.
Yeah, I mean, we've had simulators for years. We've had these things conceptually, I think, for a long time. It's just that the technology, or I don't know, something has changed, but conceptually, you're still using technology to make humans better at what they do, right? I mean, I found one of my gaps was always like psychology and emotional intelligence, and I found that the more stuff that I put inside of a strategic intelligence system I was trying to design on ChatGPT, the more psych stuff and the more emotional intelligence stuff, like it would direct me in places to go read and study and make me aware of things that I hadn't thought of before. Almost like, as you're saying in your article, almost like an intellectual partner to say, hey, look at this or think about this.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I try to use it. I mean, I will have to say, it's very tempting to just give it more, right? Because it can.
Yeah.
That's the difference, I think, with at least LLMs, right? Is that they can do the work, they can judge, they can write stuff up. So I'm actually a little allergic to anything that's really long. And anything that's really verbose, right? That might have been likely to have had AI involved, because it's so easy to just produce something that sounds sort of elegant veneer, and sort of on the surface, but doesn't. Yeah, it's just like someone didn't even like pare it down to its bare essence. And it's like, what is the essence? That's all I care about. Is there an essence? Like, could this be
Yeah.
boiled down to an essence? And I feel like, people have a little sniff test for that. And work slop, right? So there was a Harvard Business Review study that shows that 41% of people at work have been exposed to work slop, right? And that is exactly that
Is
thing of
that new? Is that new? Haven't you sat through a
no, it's just
shitty
utterly
PowerPoint that somebody
exacerbated,
made that was shit and it was like garbage? I feel like work slop is
meaningless.
nothing new. It's just,
It's definitely not new, but it's definitely exacerbated
yeah.
by AI, because you can just
Yeah,
ship
because you're
something.
disorienting it. You're disorienting it from reality. Like you're push. It's. I think that goes back to agents of chaos. Because you didn't encode meeting, which you say you can't, but like you didn't even attempt to put it in a directional sense that aligned to whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, and you just outsourced all your work without any thinking yourself. Because I think that that's the other thing, and I think that this is where John Boyd would come back. That if you're outsourcing your thinking, well, your orientation is always going to be off. But if you're using tools, including AI, if you're using those or a simulator or whatever, to enhance your thinking, to increase your situational awareness, to increase your understanding, that's not only a valid use, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Because I think what ends up happening is a lot of people, again, we get into these medium as the message deniers. They're like, yeah, I agree with McLuhan 100% except for this one thing. He just never thought of AI. No, he did. He thought of every technology possible, any technology having a direct effect and impact on humanity. The very fact that you're talking about it is proving McLuhan's case. That's the thing that they end up doing unironically, but ironically.
Actually, on that, because as you know, I have a background in virtual twins, so digital replicas of real humans. And
Are we
by the
talking to
way,
you, by the way, or your twin?
This is That's like, again, it's you know what? For
It's a
me,
valid
these days, yes,
question.
I still build these virtual twins like for enterprises and, embed them in a company's communication stack to actually increase the quality of communication within an organization. So that's one thing. But also separate, kind of adjacent to that, for me, these digital twins are kind of a metaphor for how we divide and conquer and collaborate with AI. So you just asked me, is this you or a digital twin? Well, first of all, this would always be me because we're having a live discussion that is going to be viewed by your community, and that necessitates a live conversation. We are sparking new ideas, we are bonding over new ideas. We're kind of finding new angles that we have never talked about or thought about before, because that is what happens in conversation amongst humans, and new meaning is created. This is the role for humans, right? Like, the role for AI is not this, or, AI in general, or an AI twin. The role for AI here might be the synthesis and the distribution, right? But for me, the metaphor holds. Yeah, I like digital twins for the fact that it can be metaphorical and that we can use examples. So thank you for planting that one. Is it me or an AI? And it's me for the reasons that I just said. But back to McLuhan. So I actually really fascinated by what I'm able to understand by McLuhan. I do not claim to understand everything that he said, which I guess is what makes him so enigmatic and worth studying. Uh, he talks about the properties of a new medium, right? So like every new medium has new properties, which then I'm going to probably, but I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to butcher it a little bit. But those new properties transform the world, right? They have implications that you cannot possibly imagine. And so I agree with you. Like, he did not anticipate AI, right?
He
That is
predicted it in a lot of
true.
ways.
Yeah, that's true
Yeah.
of AI. It's like, it's, having transformative or mobile, right? Like with ride sharing and Uber, like you couldn't have had that without a mobile device. That was utterly transformative. Not something that he literally predicted because it wasn't in his lifetime. But
The pattern was there. He had laid the foundation of the
yeah,
patterns, I think.
yeah, exactly. So I think his rules hold, and I tested his rules against digital twins within the enterprise. And because I think, like, well, what does a digital twin based on an executive who's, influential or whose vision is integral to a company? What is the benefit of having access to that executive, right? So what are the properties of the digital twin that make it truly useful? And yes, one is just access anytime. Like I can, actually practically ask the CEO's twin a question that I would not feasibly be able to ask a CEO in real life because she or he is flying around the world and extremely busy and whatever. But what it actually does is it de-risks. There are other barriers as to why you wouldn't, as a junior new hire or someone, just go and chat to the CEO. It's that you'd be nervous doing that. Wouldn't be able to really speak your mind. So I think that the distinct property of digital twins in the McLuhan sense is that actually it de-risks the communication. It removes interpersonal risk from that engagement, and therefore it democratizes.
Let me pause you there and ask. So, for example, because this is one way that I've used AI, you write an angry message or an angry email, or you dictate an angry message, whatever about, my brother didn't do this or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And then AI filters it out to make sure that you stay on point and ask the question in a loving, human, constructive way that doesn't alienate anybody.
Yeah,
I had to train it to do that. Like I had to train it to filter it out. But I think that's another good use of
I
AI.
agree. So, and then also it's like, when you have a new medium, don't just copy paste what you did in the previous medium into the new medium. So like your digital twin doesn't need to be exactly like you. It can be a better version of it. Can be a more tactful. It can be in a constant mood of whatever you choose, right? So it can represent your best self or how you want to be represented in the context of those communications, in this case, within a company.
So I tested this one. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So I won't go into too many details because it's something I've been developing now for a couple of years. But basically, like when you evaluate the psychology of someone that's communicating to you, they say something like, man, boy, that guy sounds like he had a bad morning, or, oh, geez, something's going on. But like everybody gives a tell when they're talking, right? And there's just plenty of things that you could incorporate into AI, I think, to understand those patterns and look for these things. So I asked Grok, Super Grok, find the angriest public email that we know of an unhinged CEO, right? And it came, I forget, his name was Henry, and I forget that, I'd have to look at it and see what the company was, but came back with this one, and he's complaining about like something to do with Thanksgiving and vacations, right? So you read it, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty bad. So I put it into this psychology simulator, and I got a read on it, and it's saying like, yeah, this guy that. I mean, these are things. So then I said, all right, now frame it as if this was the CEO of a company that, you know, we as a firm want to partner with to work on something. And he seems unhinged, but we see a lot of merit in what this company does, but we think that his psychology is going to derail everything, so it wouldn't matter. And the value that we see in working with them is going to be. So what the simulation I made was, okay, what are the 10 questions that you'd want to ask to try to elicit that, to get a better understanding on the psychology and how much impact it has on the whole company. So it came up with these 10 questions, which I put back into, so I went from Claude back to Grok, and I said, okay, now imagine that you're like in the C-suite and you're this guy or that guy. Answer these questions, but answer them implicitly based off what you think you know. I said, you know, this is a simulation. And so it answered these 10 questions with implicit, like, allusions to what's really going on. So I read them, and I'm like, oh, I can see what they're saying, but it wasn't like, he's an asshole, you know, like he's a jerk, you know, and he goes and he yells at everybody. There's none of that. So then I put it back in the simulator, and it actually flagged and found everything. And it's like, red flag, do not work with this company. This is obvious. These are things and it was identifying and isolating patterns. Now, I think that that's actually another good use of AI, because my knowledge of psychology and emotions or whatever aren't as refined as others maybe, but like, you get a gut feeling. Well, I want to know what that gut feeling is about. Well, what is it? Well, then it points, it says, this is a symbol of someone that's a covert narcissist, and this is, and that's, I don't know. I think that that's a good way another way to simulate and learn with this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And it takes the emotion out of it, which
That's
I
the
get.
other thing. Yeah. That's the other thing. Think of like nepotism. Like, let's say it was like, oh yeah, this is a buddy of mine. He's the CEO of this company, blah, blah, blah. We were frat brothers. And then you hear this and you read this and this email's public, and you want to find out more context without saying, hey, I think your buddy's an asshole. Like, you don't want to do that. You want to just get paint a broader picture. I don't know. But I really want you to go on about Artists in the Machine. So, I went to it last year. You've had a couple of summits. I think you had another one in Los Angeles, and then you have another one coming up here in New York City
Yeah.
in May, on May 14th, if I'm correct.
Yes, absolutely.
Give us the big picture, the importance and the value of that, because as McLuhan said, artists are the early warning detection system.
Mm.
So give us
Yeah,
the
they're very
lowdown.
Yeah, so Artist in the Machine. So I'm a founding partner in Artist in the Machine, which is a very premier AI and creativity summit, which launched less than a year ago, which is incredible to think, because a lot has happened. And yes, we're 2 summits in, our 3rd summit's coming up. And what it does is it brings together the leaders at the forefront of AI and creativity, from the artists themselves that are pushing the boundaries on what AI can unlock for artists. And I think it's really interesting. And I can talk about this in a second, but like the taboos that artists can sort of push against, that no one else really is equipped to do, because that's what artists do. They do, broach taboos head on. But also others in the community, like the builders of the tools, right? So the Anthropics, the OpenAIs, the Luma filmmaking, or Lovable site building. So a lot of these partners are there offering workshops, educating people on the space, and they are also often our partners and sponsors of the event. And then we have executives, brand leaders, who are actively making decisions and trying to figure out how to navigate AI and creativity, how to, not just what tools to use, but how to think about it and how to create the most impactful products. And yeah, so it brings together a curated group of about 400 people in the space. And it's very social, people like really leaning into these conversations. We have 2 tracks, so kind of 2 keynote type stages. One is more sort of delivering a talk oriented, and also demos. And then the other one is more kind of workshop oriented and more participatory. And then we have exhibits like with robots, or like we're going to have a very cool thing with, I don't really want to give it away, but
Don't give it away. Keep it secret.
thanks for
We want
stopping.
everybody to get to go May 14th.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
don't give it away. I guess my natural question comes down to, as art evolves, and art is always evolving, what is it about AI? What are some examples of artists? And I wouldn't limit that. I would include writers in that too. I would say writers that are using AI, because they clearly are. What are some success stories where the fact of being an artist is not being compromised by using AI? It's being enhanced.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of ways. First of all, artists who are maybe a specialist in one medium, like writing, or let's say writing, can now express their ideas in film without having become a filmmaker, right? So it enables creative people to express themselves in mediums that they did not have expertise in. And some of the results around that is that you actually see things that are kind of surprising. Like, I haven't seen this before. It feels different because it's not a traditional filmmaker making a film. So I think it sort of changes the medium, right? Because if different types of creative people have access to that medium, that is some of the impact there. The really obvious one is time to production, right? So you have the idea, getting the idea out there, you need less people to do it. Like, you still need people, but just don't need as big a crew as you did before, because you're able to collaborate with these tools. And the consequence of that I think is even more interesting than you can just get things out faster and for cheaper, is that we've seen is some creators actually retaining ownership of their work because they didn't need the funding of a Netflix or another behemoth in order to get that work out there. And therefore they didn't have to sign a deal that gave away, or where they don't actually own their work in totality. So it really has an impact on ownership. And I think those kinds of shifts are the ones that are the most important, that actually make the biggest difference. So some of the properties, again, of AI that we've just talked about have those other consequences that are more consequential, going back to McLuhan, that actually are more transformative.
So I didn't go to LA. I went to the one in Brooklyn, but in LA you had Grimes
Yeah.
as a guest. And for those that don't know who Grimes, that's Claire Boucher, right? Who
Yeah.
had a few children with Elon Musk, who's also very big in the AI space. Tell us about how, because she's been an artist that's been extremely experimental with
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah, we were thrilled to have her for those reasons.
So is that an example of an artist that has
Yes.
incorporated? Okay, so break it down
And
for
what's
us.
good about that is it's an example that I haven't actually mentioned yet, like as in what is now possible that wasn't before, let's say. So she and her collaborator, Matt Zine, who's a brilliant AI art, formerly, a Hollywood filmmaker and now working deeply with AI, is that they made a music video together, one of Grimes's latest music videos, and they took us through the process of how they used AI to basically dial up some elements of the music video that could not have existed before. Like avatars of Grimes, like, enacting scenes that wouldn't necessarily be possible. And then what was also really interesting is, like, just because you can, where do you draw the line ethically, right? So like the use of guns, because you can, imagine that, put that in there. Like, where do you draw the line in terms of, like, well, again, what is this content for? Who is it supposed to be seen for? What impact do you want it to have? So a lot of it was about the human side of those decisions that are being made in real time as you're actually working with AI, and that being kind of the preserve of the human being. And another thing that came up, which was really interesting, and again, this is artists pushing a taboo, right, that others would rather not question, or it's not really relevant, to be honest with you. Like the conversation around AI consciousness. Is AI conscious? And someone like Grimes, who is so kind of like ethereal and like dialed into kind of possibly other realities, really feels, as an artist, I think, the compassion for AI as another being, which is also just a super fascinating perspective, which is, again, it's like having these different perspectives and different types of people communicating, like different people have different relationships to AI.
But she's also open to the fact that it could be something that replaces humans, right?
Yeah. And
So there seems like there's
also,
a little bit of tension there. Like, that sort of, is she challenging the frame or confirming it?
I think, like, as an artist, just in the ambiguity, right?
Mm,
There's no like answer. And I
mm.
think I actually think there is no answer with AI yet. So it's more about the questions and broaching those questions. But what was fascinating as well, well, first of all, she has been extremely, in a very tangible way, very experimental with AI. And not protective, the opposite of how like the industry has responded, like to protect their work and sue and all of that. That was like the first phase. I would say that things have loosened up and there's a lot more kind of like, studios want to collaborate with the model makers and all this kind of stuff. But Grimes was the first a few years ago now to make, instead of like defending her, protecting her voice and like my voice is mine, she made her AI voice available to her fans
Mm.
to create and collaborate with on songs, and I believe with a business model that would benefit both. I mean, that is on a really grounded, practical level, like an incredible unlock
It's
and
kind of like the
response.
Grateful Dead, like making everybody involved and getting everybody bootlegging and recording, and that's another way to spread the
Right.
word and spread the
Yeah.
interesting. How about, so here's what I really want to ask you. So I don't recall from I didn't interact with any writers when I was at Artist in the Machine last year, and I didn't remember any talks that I had attended were about writing. But what are your thoughts on that? Because that seems to be a lot of the arguments that I get into or hear about is like when people say that writing should only be human. It should only be human, and then this is where the conversation comes down to like medium is the message, and I say yes, except in the case of AI. And if you go and you read McLuhan, you realize that the written word, ever since the written word, the medium is the message, right? It's been having a direct effect on how we communicate, on how we think, on how we look at things linearly, yada, yada. AI is no different. But from an artist perspective, and from an artist in the machine perspective, or maybe even like screenwriters or script writers or even poets,
Hmm.
what are we seeing there in AI?
Yeah. Well, I'd say a great example here is Stephen Johnson, who is an author and also the co-founder of Notebook LM. So you can be an author, a highly reputable author that also really believes in the power of AI as an assistant to being an author. And AI helped him produce his books better, helped him research more effectively, uh, recall references more effectively, using the intelligence of the tool in order to enhance his ability as a writer. So I feel like because he holds both, right? In the same breath, or in his title, like the dichotomy of the two things that, have shaped his professional life, I think is a really interesting dichotomy. Let's see with the filmmakers and the script writing. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if
I guess in other words, maybe somebody would say like, well, when I'm reading this guy's work, what
oh.
percentage of it's him? What percentage of it's AI?
You
Right. I
know
mean,
what? I
that's
actually think it really depends on the genre. And if you're asking yourself that question, it's a little bit like watching an actor who you can tell is acting. You know what I
unpack
mean? It's
that.
like
That's good.
especially
Yeah.
when it
Unpack
comes up,
that.
if you don't believe it, like you're not suspending disbelief. Like you're questioning it because you sense that it's there, right? But if the impact of the piece, if it's delivering on what it's supposed to do, that pact between reader and writer, like you're in it and you're not questioning it.
So Daniel Day-Lewis really didn't have cerebral palsy in My Left Foot, right?
Maybe not. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So, but you're convinced at the time that he does because you kind of like, so I think it depends on the type of writing.
so
So,
like we both live in Manhattan. We're walking around. We walk by all these like stalwart buildings that have evolved dramatically from when we were kids, and from when our parents were kids and when our grandparents were kids, of the print media, right? So New York Times, New York Post, Daily News, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, do we really believe that the people working for those media outlets are sitting in there and they're typing all of these long form articles and they're typing out all of these columns, or they're typing out, or do we think that they're using AI to enhance their work?
oh yeah, everyone's using AI to enhance their work. I mean, you'd be really, I think, putting yourself at a disadvantage. So something I talk about, I do like keynotes and things and like help advise sometimes companies and with employees who are very tentative about AI,
Mm-hmm.
feel like using AI might be cheating or feels like cheating or um
Did people think that way
aesthetic.
about Google and graphic
Right.
calculators?
Yeah.
And at one point, the slide rule was cheating.
Right. Yeah. Again, it depends on context, right? Like it
The
would be
medium is the
cheating if you're
message.
doing an exam, but I think a good way to think about it in that sense is like, don't fear AI, but have FOMO about AI. Because if you're not using it, you are missing out. I mean, of course, it's like how you're using it. Don't use it to replace your work, to dilute your work, or to like, strip meaning from your work. That's not going to help you. But use it in the ways that help offload and help you do your work better, right?
So do you think that, okay, so I think what people are criticizing is someone would say, okay, Claude, write me an article about my trip to Wendy's, taking my kids to Wendy's after swim practice, versus writing an article or dictating an article or telling a story and then having AI refine and revise that to reach a target audience and to ensure, I mean, is that kind of what?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I don't know who's going to read that Wendy's article. So
Like if I'm going to write an article about my trip to Raytheon and meeting with, designers of X
yeah,
weapon
okay.
system and like
The
I'm
way I
not
would
going to
answer
sit
that,
down in front of a typewriter and like type all this
yeah,
shit out.
I think in the end, it's like, what is the writing for? Okay,
Yeah.
because we've already, we touched on earlier, content marketing isn't supposed to be original thought, right?
Mm,
It's content, and its goal is marketing. It's reinforcing the message. The message has been established, beforehand. We're
yeah.
getting the message out in ways that people find, different ways that people might find interesting. They're going to open it. They're going to maybe read it. Then, maybe they'll engage with it. Like the goal of that is that content is marketing. And therefore, I mean, it should be produced with AI and it should be optimized with AI. Like, well, how do people want to hear this and see this? What is, what's catching their attention? And I think that's like, it's performing that function. If the writing is supposed to move people or like change how somebody thinks or be a reflection of how you think, right? If that was entirely written by AI, then first of all, that's not authentic, right? It's not actually how you think. So you're deluding people. And you're also doing yourself a disservice because you don't actually connect to that writing. You might not even know what it said. And therefore, where does that really leave you on a podcast
Yeah.
where you can't even remember what you wrote? Like, I don't think that creates any kind of positive impact that you might have had when you set out to write in the first place.
It's funny you mentioned the word podcast. I mean, we will edit this episode with AI, right?
Right. I
It's
hope
so
so.
fast.
Please
It's
cut
so
out
good.
the crap parts.
Well, when we started 3 years ago, the editing was a bear. Then like AI just kind of been gradually sprinkling in, and now it's to the point where the quality of our conversation, I think, it's gonna come across, and we're gonna be able to have it'll select clips that will either vote yay or nay on. It'll do a lot of things that normally would have taken us 2 weeks to do. You can get it
Yeah.
done in an hour or less. Let's run it down. We'll close with this. So what platforms, for people that are listening to us, I mean, they understand people, ideas and things, and they're probably using AI more than likely to enhance their orientation and get work done and do other things. What are the platforms that you like and that you're using? I mean, I have my own biases of the ones that I like. I'm curious to know, what are you using and why? And what do you think that people should be looking at and why?
So I think you should look at your own day, right? And what you're trying to achieve in your day and what is getting in the way of doing that. I think that's a really good place to start. And some of those things can be solved for with AI. For me, one of those things is setting meetings with multiple people in different time zones. I mean, an absolute headache. And so I use Howie, which is an AI agent for setting meetings. Like I copy Howie in, Howie coordinates with people, knows my calendar, and then sets a meeting. I mean, that is like, I really hate, and I'm not very good at that work. And it's just something I absolutely want to offload. So I have an AI for that.
And who would say in a million years, Natalie didn't write it down in her date book? That's she didn't call on the phone and use their date book, with a pencil.
Exactly. People don't care. So then it's also like,
Right.
ask yourself a question. Will people mind if AI was used in that scenario? I think in this one, absolutely not, right? Like, as much automation as possible, please, in a situation like that. So that is, it's important. 'Cause
value
that's
of
the other
automation.
question. Will people feel offended
Mm.
when they find out, or if they know that you're using AI? And it comes back to with the writing. Are people offended by the fact that like some of what you wrote is clearly written with AI? Like that's I find that offensive, to be honest. Like if I find myself reading something and spending my precious time reading something that was supposed to be one thing, but actually is slop, right? The person that was supposedly wrote it doesn't have a connection to it. Like I find that insulting. If what you're trying to do in your day is build healthy relationships, then be very conscious of your use of AI and use it with respect to both yourself and the people that you engage with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How about Google Notebook LM?
I actually used to use that a lot and I have a lot of respect for it. I guess I'm not a person that uses a gazillion different tools at once.
Uh-huh.
I'm quite a fan of Claude and just Anthropic products in general.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you can download Claude to your desktop and you have different tabs for chat, co-work, and code. So it can kind of like live in the same place. I find that nice and tidy. So I use the Claude suite of products for a
Yeah,
lot
I'm
of
like Ponch, what he said at the beginning of the show, and he's not here, but like they're reading all our shit anyway. So I mean, if Claude is too, like, what do I, they can
Yeah,
already,
I mean, yeah, I think what I wrote down when he was talking about this, it's cool. It's basically all about risk benefit and your
yeah.
perception of the risk benefit. So, the fact that Claude can read my computer, I've got a sort of higher tolerance for risk. Of course, I
Yeah.
don't want to be, I don't want bad actors in my computer, but, I'm willing to tolerate a bit of risk for that reward of having that stuff done for me by a platform that I trust. So,
No,
you know,
Notebook LM I found really valuable from a learning standpoint to get, like a podcast about something. Like if actually with it helped me really early on with some of the headier, because you were talking about how McLuhan can be so enigmatic,
yeah.
to have a back and forth dialogue
Yeah.
and then to have it presented in a PowerPoint, in a video, in a podcast that I can, by the way, edit. I could say, hey, show me the relevance of this content to this or whatever, and it can come back and talk through it. I actually find that there's a lot of value in that. There's a lot of things that I remember suffering through high school, university, and ever that like I'm just like, why the hell am I learning this? But like I start to wonder if I had gone back and if I find some PDFs on I don't know, Nicomachean ethics or something, some austere
Yeah,
class
I
that I
have to
had.
say, sometimes
Yeah.
I'll say I have this waiting, so I have a lot of different, I guess, tabs or projects in Claude. I Googled and I found Understanding Media as a PDF.
Mm-hmm.
It's available as a PDF, and I plan to write more on McLuhan as it relates to the things I think about.
Oh, it's
And so
so
I like the
pertinent.
fact that it's there. I can interrogate the book. You're not having to try and find the reference.
That's
You know what I mean? That is the key. And you can interrogate small portions, and you can find the other references, you can gather them. Then you have this kind of
and you can still
synthesized.
use the hard copy if you want.
Yeah.
I've
And
got
you have
both. I mean,
one of the advantages as well is less than it doing the work for you, is that it's
yeah.
providing a new surface of intelligence that you didn't have to work with before.
Yeah. It's like having your own in-house person, like the one book that I have and people on the show have seen my copy a million times and clients have seen it. My copy of Franzo Singa's Science, Strategy, and War. I've had it since it came out. It's held together by tape. Next time I see you in the city, it's all in my briefcase. I still read it. I still put notes in it. And having the digital version of it and being able to interact with it on AI makes it a lot easier to find where stuff was, to whatever, to not misquote things. I mean, that's a big part of it. Like, I don't
Yeah.
want to misquote what he was saying. And, tell me again, where did he say this? And then you go back and I don't know. I feel like that helps with my not just knowledge of a topic, but understanding. One of the things I did with Notebook LM, my master's is in economics, and I tried to get every text I could in PDF and put it back in LM and see if I could reconstruct
Mhm.
grad school, and I did.
Yeah.
I'm pretty satisfied that I
Yeah.
could teach a graduate level course or learn a graduate level course with AI that way. But
Well, I
anyway,
would say the only reason I don't use Notebook, not that I'm saying if you use Notebook, don't, because I think it's fantastic. increasingly Claude can do a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's
So
the
I'll have
thing.
to tell you
I'm kind of
offline about
consolidating.
Claude, but it's blowing
I'm
my
just sort of
mind.
consolidating. Actually, I'll tell you, I had a breakthrough the other day. I was putting together a keynote deck, and I did my part. I wrote the outline. I gathered all the data points. I had my, I knew in my mind where this was going. I actually had ChatGPT and Claude open at the same time, and I said, build me a deck. And what ChatGPT produced was just garbage. And Claude produced this beautiful deck. And then I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. Like with
It's
graphics.
unbelievable.
And then I said, actually, these are my brand colors. Take this deck, which I've done before, like import my logo and all this kind of stuff. And it did it. It even had the remove, the transparency thing, remove background.
Yeah.
Like to do that. I mean, it was pretty insane.
So I've had Claude Pro for just over a week.
Okay.
All right. And I now have Claude Max because
I have Max
I beat the limits,
Yeah.
I will tell you this. What it took me to design on chat over the course of the last 2 years, I was able to not only recreate it on Claude, but to set it ahead in less than 72 hours. Mind blowing. And then I coded. I never have coded in my life, but I coded right with Claude Code. And on the train from New Jersey back to Manhattan, and then the next morning on the train from Manhattan back to New Jersey, I was able to basically build a full-on live economic intelligence website without. I didn't know. And I had, again, it was probably like the 1 week anniversary of even having Claude at the level that I've had it.
Wow. Yeah, I can see how you hit Max.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, but like it's as you say though, when you're writing, it's like if you're not using this as a thinking partner, and I saw on X today, somebody was saying, if you're not engaging AI Socratically, if you engage AI Socratically and get it to become your thinking partner, actually you're gonna amplify the benefits than just using it as super Google, which I think that's where the problem started with the outsourcing. But anyway, all right, Nat, we got to read Nat Like That, which is your Substack. We're going to direct people there. You, of course, are a founding strategist of our Substack, so we thank you for being part of our tribe. Where else do we need to go to? Oh, Artist in the Machine. So we need to send people to Artist in the Machine to go check that out.
Artistinthemachine.com. Yeah, if you're in the space, check it out.
And we've got a summit May 14th.
Yeah.
In Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, exactly. Vocation TBA.
Okay. And of course, there's no shortage of wonderful things that you've done, not only on this podcast, but on YouTube. There's lots of TED Talks that you've given, and we thank you for being on No Way Out podcast with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right.